Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Summers, and welcome to the audio edition of Mind, Body, Soul, a show about your mental, physical, and spiritual wellness. Well, I have with me today a very good friend of mine, actually, Peter Andrews. I've known Peter for a long time, and Peter is a retired school counselor. He now has his own counseling and hypnotherapy practice. And as we go through this interview, Peter's information is displayed there in front of you. So uh, if you like what you hear and you think Peter might be able to help you, I'll certainly give him a call. So today, Peter is going to talk about rational emotive behavior therapy called REBT. It's a type of therapy introduced by Albert Ellis in the 1950s. It's an approach that helps you identify irrational beliefs and negative thought patterns that may lead to emotional or behavioral issues. REBT is the original form of cognitive behavioral therapy, which people have probably heard it referred to as CBT. So it is both the ancestor of and a type of cognitive behavioral therapy. REBT is based on the theory that emotional disturbances such as self-pity, shame, guilt, depression, stress, and anxiety are largely self-constructed by our thoughts and belief systems. Peter is going to talk about how to reduce and even possibly eliminate unnecessary negative feelings. He often uses this model to help his clients reduce or eliminate unnecessary negative emotions. As Peter says, it's as simple as A, B, C. And I always say, Peter, first of all, welcome and thanks for taking the time out of your day to talk to us.
You're more than welcome, Gary. Thank you.
Yeah, so, I always say to people, it's life. People say life is complicated, but I think it's our thoughts that really complicate behavior. And I know when we've talked a lot about this, and we all know it's normal for people to experience feelings. So I don't think we're questioning people's feelings. We're questioning the thought that causes those feelings, because you can't really have a feeling unless you have a thought first. So do you want to just give some people an idea of how you help clients deal with this unwanted behavior?
Yes, so certainly certain feelings exist as normal reactions to abnormal situations. For example, feelings of loss and sadness associated with uh, grief. Uh, these are normal feelings that arise because of these abnormal occurrences. And therefore, it's important to be able to deal with those and to vent those in appropriate and healthy ways.
Right.
But there's a certain number of feelings that are created uh, through our own thoughts uh, and our beliefs. And these are the ones that this ABC model addresses. And these are the ones that we can have some control over then, negative feelings that people often experience.
So people say, and I know this is an old cliche, but people say life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you deal with it. But really, that's what we're really talking about here, isn't it? And luckily, that's the way it is, because if if it was what happened to you that caused the problem, then the world would be in chaos. That's
Yeah,
why when some people get cut off in traffic, it bothers some people and it doesn't bother other people, because when you assign the meaning of being caught off in traffic to, oh, he intentionally cut me off, or he's a crazy driver, or you make all these assumptions about why you were cut off, when in fact the only thing that you know is that you got cut off. Everything else is a thought that you had in your mind that's not based in fact, correct?
exactly, exactly. So,
So
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go, no, you go ahead.
So with this ABC model, if you could picture, the letters A, B, and C, one above the other. A stands for an activity or event,
Right.
and C stands for the emotional consequence of that event.
Right.
Usually we're talking about negative
Right.
emotional, but
Right.
you can create positive feelings through this model as well. So I'd like to use an example to illustrate this.
Sure.
Somebody is walking into a place of work or into a supermarket or something like that, and they see someone that they know who just ahead of them lets the door close in their face.
Right. Okay.
So that's the action or event.
Right.
The emotional consequence might be irritation. It might be even as much as anger, guilt, maybe even be feeling worried. And some may not have an emotional reaction to it at all. So how is it that this one event, which you have very little to no control over, can elicit so many different possible negative feelings?
Right.
Well, that's where the B comes in.
Right.
It's not so much the action directly connected to the consequence. It's the belief with respect to the action that can cause the negative or positive consequences.
So the what you're going to talk about is when you change the B, you can change the C.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And these reactions are not all negative. So if I believe that was rude, then that might lead to irritation or
Right.
even anger.
Right.
If I believe I must have done something wrong, then that could lead to guilt. I believe it's not like them, I'm a little bit worried. I believe it's not important enough to ruin my day. And I don't even know if they certainly saw me for sure anyway.
Right.
So it's important then to examine your beliefs with respect to these things that are going on around us. And by examining, one might ask, well, how do I know what my beliefs are? And you can explore your beliefs by examining your self-talk.
Yeah.
That voice going on inside of your head, hopefully rational.
And people don't spend enough time dissecting that self-talk. They just let it ramble on and on and on. And in a lot of cases, it's negative.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to hold ourselves to a higher standard than we do other people or our friends. We beat ourselves up over things that we did, and we create disasters in our heads. And all we really need to do is just to redefine that belief, and life can tend to work out a little bit easier for us, can't it?
Certainly. So it's really important for that self-talk to be reasonable, rational, acceptable, and attainable. Because when they're not, if the person actually didn't, going back to the example, if the person did not actually see you, but you believe that they did, then you've created unnecessary negative feelings.
Right. So I guess what I normally say when I talk to my clients is, if you're making an assumption about something, there's a very simple question you can ask yourself, and that is, am I thinking this, or is it a fact? And in pretty well all cases, you're just thinking it. So stop thinking it. And I know that's a very simplified way of looking at it, but we have to start somewhere. And so you make all these assumptions about why the person let the door slam on you, but you don't know why he slammed the door. You don't know why the person cut you off in traffic. I remember when my father died a number of years ago, and my brother lived in Mount Pearl, and 3 times me and my wife were the only ones in the room, and Dad was taken off life support, and the doctor came and said, Gary, I think this is it. Your father is pretty well. So I called the family in, and he got through it. And then the second time we had to call the family in, and he got through it the third time. I was there again, and because we all took turns. My brother, who lived in Mount Pearl, was really late getting in, and I said, what happened? He said, well, there was a guy in front of me on the parkway wouldn't let me pass. Now, the guy in front of my brother on the parkway made the assumption that my brother was a crazy driver, but all my brother wanted to do was to see his father before he died. And that's an example of what you're talking about, is someone makes the wrong assumption about why the person did something. And that creates a problem.
It certainly can, yeah. certainly can. But there's certain words that very easily roll off most people's tongues that tend to have built-in irrationality. You just used one of them a few minutes ago when you said all.
Right.
And I talk about this with clients a lot, and I still find myself sometimes using some of these words, which are on what I call my red flag list or my hit list.
Yeah.
That tend to have, I'm not going to say always have, because always is on the list.
Exactly. Right. Yes.
They tend to have built-in irrationality. Some of the more common ones, this is not totally all of them. Always, never, got to, which is Newfoundland terms for have to.
Yeah.
Every, should usually implies guilt. Can't, anything to do with perfect. These kind of extreme words that are kind of black and white, and quite often have built-in irrationality.
Because when you step back and study it, you're always late. Well, that's a bit of an extreme. You're probably not always late. You never listen to me. I'm sure there are situations where you do listen to someone at some point in time. Nobody likes me. Everybody is against me. Well, I'm sure there are people who are. So when those types of extremities naturally cause stress in your. So Peter, when are feelings considered normal?
They're normal when they're, as I mentioned earlier, reactions to things that are going around us that are hurtful. The stages of grief are anger and guilt. Guilt not necessarily being rational, but people usually feel a sense of guilt. Sadness, of course. It might even be something like if a husband is killed in a car accident, and the wife says, if only I had given him a hug before he left, he wouldn't have been in that intersection.
Absolutely.
But then the next person says, if only I hadn't given him a hug,
right,
then he would have been through the intersection.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just trying to make sense of an abnormal situation.
Yeah. And everyone. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You mentioned an example of some of these words. A silly one I use is if I go home and I just throw my shoes in the porch, my wife says, "You never put your shoes away."
Yeah, right.
Well, so all I have to do is, I remember last month on your birthday, I put my shoes away. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, I don't think you'd say it, but then I duck.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know.
People say I have to pay taxes.
Yeah.
You don't have to. It's a choice. It's not a good choice.
And that's why when you say, it's so much better to say I choose to pay taxes instead of saying I have to pay taxes.
Yes.
I choose to go to work because I want a certain lifestyle. I want to live in a certain house, rather than saying I have to go to work, because that creates all kinds of problems. Now, we're all entitled to our feelings. I mean, there's nothing wrong with anger. I mean, sometimes we get angry, but how you deal with the anger is what creates the problem. So Peter, talk about the ABC process. So run us through a scenario where someone comes to you with whether it's guilt or whether they're resentful of something. Just walk through that process with someone so that our listeners can get a good idea of how they can use this method to help them deal with some of the negative feelings that they have.
Just before doing that, I often speak with clients about a simple but powerful relaxation technique of diaphragmatic breathing. That's where a person is breathing from the diaphragm, from the belly, so to speak.
Right.
And in doing so, getting an awful lot more oxygen, creating some relaxation, but also creating some time and space to consider some of these things.
And so, I'm glad you brought that up, because many people have probably heard about the magic of the pause, and to be able to just step back and just taking some deep breaths be able to get you to compose yourself so you respond to a situation instead of overreact to a
Yes.
situation. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Continue.
So I see quite a number of clients for stress and anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes I'll start talking, or I'll hear them use some of the words on this hit list. Like, I've got to get everything done.
Yeah.
I can't do uh, uh, enough to get things done. Got to is a very strong word. And then when you don't get it done, then you might start to feel overwhelmed, or you might start beating yourself up, feeling overstressed,
Yeah.
or even anxious because the next day you figure you're not going to get anything done again.
Right.
So instead of just changing the word got to it's important for me to get as much done as I reasonably can.
Right.
It changes the intensity and
It's
therefore the consequence.
right. It's softer, right?
Yes.
Those should, have to, got to, must are really harsh, and they really put a lot of pressure on people
Yes.
to do those things. And then when you don't, like you said, now you're into an anxiety, anxious type of a situation. Okay, go ahead.
And then the word should. I should be able to do it all. Well, there's two words here, but should. Then when it doesn't happen, then that tends to lead to guilt. And again, guilt, beating yourself up and robbing your energy, and it's not good. So it's important to be able to be aware of these words. I like to get inside of people's head. If it's a hypnosis client, I'll actually mention these hit words, and so that they become even more aware of when they're using them. And sometimes it even makes it difficult for them to speak a little at times, because they realize, oh gosh, I just used every and always and should in the last 5 sentences.
Exactly. Yeah.
But once people start becoming more aware of that self-talk, it becomes really, really important, because yourself is listening.
And
self-talk is important because yourself is listening.
And that's really where all of your autopilot and your programming comes from, is your self-talk. Because when you hear yourself and listen to yourself so much, that becomes your belief system. If you beat yourself up all the time and you hear that all the time, then you just naturally are going to believe is like the bully on the street who keeps telling you you're no good and stuff like that. After a while, you just tend to believe it. So it's not only what people say to you, it's just as important how you talk to yourself.
Oh, even more so, because you have a lot more control over what you're saying to yourself than what other people say to you.
So you talked about how people can identify their beliefs through their self-talk, because that's really one of the ways, and probably the biggest way, how we program ourselves. What happens to us, the events that we go through, what people say to us, what we say to ourselves. So how important, when you identify those, it's important to write those negative beliefs down and to try and figure out how to deal with them a little better than the way people have been dealing with them. So what would you advise people to do when they list off, say, 4 or 5? I'm terrible at math. I never get anything right. What process would the people go through to, like, identify those negative beliefs? I guess you just take a pen, a piece of paper, and start writing them down.
As you recognize them in your speech, in your conversations, pause and reframe them. Reframe the statement. It still has to be rational, attainable, and reasonable to you. But it's so important to reframe the words into something which then creates less negative feelings, or even eliminates them. But then this can also work a little bit from the backwards. When you recognize the negative emotional consequences that you're experiencing, it might be anger, it might be guilt, or anything else. Once you start using this model, you can then ask yourself, what might be a belief statement or a thought that might be leading to this anxiety or guilt, then reframe it so that it is acceptable and reasonable, but causing less negative emotions. Now, I should also mention as well that quite often, while it's not on the hit list, quite often people use the word feel when it's not identifying a feeling. I feel this is the right thing to do. What's the feeling? What's the feeling behind identified there? It's not a feeling.
It's right.
But and I do encourage people to explore different options and pros and cons, and eventually you're going with your gut. But it's not a feeling. It's you believing this is the right course of action.
You
therefore you can challenge it.
And that's the key. Right.
Challenge beliefs, but not feelings.
Right, because everyone is entitled to their feelings, right?
Yes. You know? If I tell someone you shouldn't be sad, well,
yeah,
that's ridiculous.
That's right. Yeah.
I am sad. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just back on that word "should" when you said, I remember watching a hockey game, and I can't remember who the coach was. They had lost a hockey game, and he said, we should have won the hockey game. And I'm thinking to myself, well, no. The team that scores the most goals should win the hockey game.
Yeah.
So when you say to yourself, I should have known better, I should have done this, I should have done that, that's really harsh. I think sometimes reframing it when you're talking about, and this is probably might be a variation, to be a little bit easier on yourself, instead of saying I should have, to say it would have been better if I had. Yeah. And that makes it a little harsher. You're not scolding yourself, because I think when people say should, I think the expectation is that the world should work out, and I'm using the word should now, but I'm using it in this context. The world is supposed to be exactly the way I want it to be. Everything's supposed to work out the way I want it to, and when it doesn't work out, then I'm upset because it should have been this way, because I expected it to be that way. Again, what you talked about was this perfectionist thing, that everything has to work out exactly. I should get it all done. I have to do this. I have to do all this. And when it doesn't, then you beat yourself up over it.
Yes. Or replace the word should with could.
Right. Pete, so we're distinguishing beliefs from thoughts, because
no.
Okay,
we're distinguishing beliefs and thoughts from feelings.
Okay, we're distinguishing beliefs and thoughts from feelings.
Yes.
Okay,
thoughts and beliefs are basically the same thing.
Okay, because even though you think something, and I'll go a little further, even though you think something, then obviously you believe it, but it doesn't. It's not necessarily true.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Okay.
But if you say to yourself, I think this is the right decision, or I believe this is the right decision, you're basically saying the same thing.
Right. Exactly. Right. Okay. So can you give me some more examples of how these words create negative feelings?
For example, someone might say, I need to be perfect. This has to be done exactly right. I usually say that striving for perfection is carving a bat to beat yourself over the head with.
Yeah. So there are a lot of mental mistakes, irrational thoughts that we have, and if people could only understand what those irrational thoughts are, and I guess one of them would be, if only I had taken a different job, if only I had done this, if only I had done that, looking back on a situation and and beating themselves up because they feel they made the wrong decision. When you have a choice,
they believe they made the wrong decision.
Right. And they think, well, if I had made a different decision, if only I had made a different decision, my life would have been different. But sure, who makes the second best decision? You got a choice A and choice B. Choice A is the right decision to make, but you say, for the hell with it, I'll make choice B. the problem we have there is we tend to beat ourselves up because we made the wrong decision. All we did was we made the right decision at the time. It just didn't work out.
You're right.
So,
What I usually say is we rarely decide to go out and make a poor decision.
right, exactly. You don't wake up one day and say,
it's determined after the fact.
right.
Then you can assess it. But when it's going on, generally speaking, and I'm almost tempted to say always, people decide when they make a choice, they think at the time it was the best choice.
Exactly.
So it's about learning.
Exactly. So when you're faced with, and people then beat themselves up because they say, well, how stupid was I? I always make the wrong decisions. I can never get anything right. They beat themselves up over it instead of saying, well, you know something? That was the right decision at the time. I learned from that. And so when I'm faced with something similar, I'll think about it differently. That's a lot easier on your mind than to beat yourself up over a decision that at that time, I mean, if today, you didn't have the information back then that you have today, it's a totally different set of circumstances. I guess that's why many people say regrets can be kind of useless because they focus on the problem.
Not the solution.
Not the solution.
Not going forward. Yeah.
Right. So you talked about hit words or red flag words. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? I guess sometimes we can have irrational expectations about situations where you mentioned this perfectionist type of an approach to life. So what any other red flag words that people really you would get them to be mindful of those words that can actually create those problems?
The ones that I've mentioned are the ones that I believe tend to cause the most significant number of problems. By keeping the words list fairly short, then people can zone in on those and emphasize, when they catch themselves using those words,
right?
Then to say, wait now, geez, I can't get that Pete Andrews out of my head. I use the word should and always in the last two sentences,
Yeah.
But I think these are the words that tend to cause the most of the unnecessary negative feelings. But again, to emphasize, when you're experiencing the negative feelings, then examine your self-talk and identify beliefs that you're holding on to. And then, are they rational and attainable? To the extent that they're not, reframe them and change them. And therefore, you're changing the consequences.
People, I think, can understand that just like your attitude that you bring to life, you can bring a positive attitude or a negative attitude to life. Beliefs are also choices. And
definitely.
And if you and people, I don't think people understand that, we've heard the term neuroplasticity and being able to reprogram your brain. But if people could only understand that beliefs are choices that we make. And if you have a belief that's not working for you, then you need to, like you said, reframe it so that you can have it work for you.
Yes.
That's the key. So people just get entrenched in this certain belief that, it can never be changed. We were born with two fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Everything else is acquired, basically by what we tell ourselves, by what people have told us, how we're programmed, how we see the world through that filter. And so I guess what you're saying is to be able to recognize that filter and to try and figure out how you can eliminate those distortions, those irrational thoughts, so that your thinking gets you more out of life and it gets you moving forward rather than digging a hole when you don't even know how you even started digging the hole in the first place. So the identification is key to this, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And being able to slow your thinking down enough to consider these things. I saw a little quote not too long ago, said there's no losing, there's only winning and learning.
Yeah. And if people, and I think sometimes that's why people, when they're in a situation, they assign success or failure to that situation. When in fact, if you could, so what is success? What is failure? I mean, is Bill Gates successful? Is Elon Musk successful? I mean, what about if we could write our own definition of success? So it's not about failing or being successful. It's about learning. It's about what did I learn from the situation?
Exactly. Success is very relative. What a person decides is his yardstick for meeting success.
Right.
There's a book that I often refer to as fairly old now. If life is a game, these are the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first rules is you're given one body, take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the rest, nutrition, and physical activity.
Yeah.
In life, you will present it with lessons, which is, that's pretty easy to take.
Yeah.
There are no mistakes, only lessons.
Right.
And lessons will be presented until learned.
And that's the key to it. Life will continue to present the lesson to you until you figured out how to deal with it.
Yeah.
I guess it's like, the person who has had some type of trauma in their life, and every time there's a situation comes up, it causes a trigger, they're launched right back into the situation because they haven't really learned how to deal with it. Yeah. Peter, great conversation as always, my friend. Is good to see you again. Can you leave? We're almost out of time. Can you leave our guests, our listeners, with a small tidbit of knowledge that they can use today to help them deal with any kind of adversity that they're facing in their lives?
Well, the first thing I would encourage people to do is to question if so, how much you believe the adversity is beyond your control. And if it truly is beyond your control, then it's important to recognize that, and instead of putting energy into trying to control something beyond your control, to look at how you're going to cope and deal with it more effectively. If you believe that they are not beyond your control, then that's when you might start seeing if the feelings are being generated by irrational beliefs again, the self-talk, going back to the same model. It's important then to reframe those beliefs. But knowing what you have control over and what you don't, it's all about the serenity prayer that
yes.
that AA has a good hold on, but it's really, really quite profound, I believe, or I think.
Yeah.
You're looking for peace. Grant me peace and serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and and the wisdom to know the difference.
Pete, I think, and of course we know, we talked earlier about the 5 stages of grief, and of course we all know the 5th one is acceptance.
Yes.
But some people really have difficulty accepting when life throws them something terrible. And everyone deals with things their own way, and it's certainly no one would ever be able to criticize anybody if you wanted to spend your time in denial or anger or whatever, frustration or bargaining, whatever or the stage you wanted to. And at some point, you have to figure out and wind your way through all that. But the quicker people can get to acceptance, because some people think, well, I don't understand why that had to happen to me. I know Carl Jung, the great German psychiatrist, said, sometimes things are not meant to be understood, just accepted.
Yeah.
And again, that Serenity poem certainly brings that out. Peter, thanks very much, my friend, for taking the time out to talk to us about how to be able to live a more rational and happy life. Again, thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Gary. Really appreciate it.
That's it, everybody, for this week. I'll be back next week with another interesting guest. Bye-bye for now.